Ed, who's on the call here, we did some education to a group of his folks in Mexico, Missouri. Ed is part of an organization, does mentoring for children. So we had some adults that have kids and worked with the kids that we were able to do some education for. We were able to, Rochelle and Lorelei and Jana we traveled to Waverly, Missouri, where another anti-trafficking advocate who's doing education in schools and a lot on the Kansas side and Missouri side, got to listen to his presentations to a rural community and to the kids first grade through 12th grade. I know the coalition continues to do its proactive education, whether it's by Zoom or in person, wherever we can. So yes, education is really key. And so all of you listening, if you have an opportunity to connect any of the groups that you belong to do an educational program via Zoom or in person, socially distanced, let's keep that going as well. Okay, so is Jessica McGoldrick on from Sea Gypsy Boutique? All right, she is not here. I wanted to, she was going to join and wanted her to share if she was. She owns a boutique in Camdenton, and she was inspired to spread awareness, exactly what we're talking about, through her boutique, her small little business. Actually, it's a really great business, a great store. And so she had t-shirts designed that say "End Human Trafficking." And is selling them at her boutique. And the coalition has some also that we will be making available online, but just even in her world there in Camdenton as a boutique owner, is raising awareness through selling t-shirts there. So everybody has a way to do something. Everybody can do something. Okay, another quick show and tell. There are these crayon boxes that say Monster Crayons, Color Your Monster Way. And these are made by volunteers. If you can imagine little kids helping tear off the paper of donated crayons and then melting down. And these monster crayons were made, molded, and a box design. And so they were inspired by a survivor sharing with Lee, who is responsible for these, calling her trafficker her monster and not even wanting to say that person's name. And so she was inspired to create these monster crayons to color your monster way. I think they're a cool idea for even kids, parents of kids, if you want to have them color their monsters away, if they've got, that monster under the bed that they might be afraid of. Just a cool idea. So these will be available on our website, and of course they will support survivors of trafficking. Let's see, because Christmas, we have to tell you about all the Christmas opportunities. Okay, so in general, just want you to know for Christmas we want to encourage you to buy slave free. To know that you can do a Google search, just put buy slave free, or also you can put in fair trade. You can also put in ethically sourced, and you can connect to websites where you can purchase products that are, as we say, slave free. Encourage you to do that for the holidays. And of course, the crayons are reused, recycled. Peace Nook is one of the stores locally in Columbia in the Global Market, which is inside the Global Market. Inside the Global Market is inside the Columbia United Church of Christ, and they have fair trade, ethically sourced gift items for you to check out. And then, of course, The Weight of Blood. It's a book that we want to encourage you to still purchase. We have the author with us, Laura McHugh. One more quick announcement, though, because we want to just promote all the possible gifts for the holidays. Just to let you know that January is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month by presidential proclamation. Was started by President Obama that many years ago. And it's also by state resolution, Missouri Sex Trafficking Awareness Month. Of course, we like to make sure you all know that human trafficking includes both sex trafficking and labor trafficking, but we are glad that Missouri focuses on sex trafficking awareness along with the national awareness for the month of January. And we will be screening a documentary called Hope Road. Might be virtual, might be in a big space where we can all social distance, but please pay attention for when that comes out. But Hope Road is a documentary of survivors of trafficking to raise awareness. And it includes one of the survivors that lives here in Missouri, in Nevada, Missouri, who was featured in that movie. So it's got ties to us here in Missouri, and we want to share that with you in January as part of commemorating all that's going on that month. And then, of course, you heard there's a legislative day going on in January as well. So don't get lazy, because there's lots going on starting in January. And then, of course, Como Gives is going on all month till 11:59 p.m. on December 31st. Hopefully you're on our email. If you signed up and you weren't on email for tonight's Zoom, then you'll be added to our email list. And also follow us on Facebook. Loretta has wonderful, great posts that will be ones that you'll just want to share with other people to let them know about how they can help with their donation. And on Como Gives, it's a very minimum donation of $10, and you can spread the wealth around to many other great organizations. Pete Zelensky, who's on here as a board member, has a peer-to-peer fundraiser on the Como Gives website on our page. So thank you for that, Pete. And then who else is on the board here? I think we have Leah is on here. And else want to speak up and introduce yourself as a board member? Marlene, you're on our advisory board. Ed, wave, you're on the board as well. You might be muted, but there you go. And Leah, did you wave? Okay, there's Leah. Anyone else on the board that I'm not catching? Okay, looks like maybe not. You speak up now or forever hold your peace. Okay. And then, of course, we have many volunteers. We have people who are scattered about in different places. We have someone from Camdenton who's on. But just appreciate everyone and all the ways that all of you have been involved. We have folks on here who are giving rides to survivors, who are running errands for survivors, and helping them get their needs met. So, okay, so I'm sorry. So, Laura, you're on. If you want to wave, I want to give just a brief background on both one of the sex trafficking cases that was part of Laura's inspiration for writing her novel, The Weight of Blood. We've had connection with each other for 7 years, so we're kind of surprised that it's been 7 years that we've known each other, but never had her talking to an audience whose special focus was human trafficking, even though you can imagine she's talked to many, many groups. So we're glad that she's joining us. The case is a pretty horrific case, and you can certainly Google search Lebanon, Missouri sex trafficking case, and there will be no shortage of press releases and news articles. Just know that it was a very awful case, which every case of human trafficking is. I will say that the Lebanon man who trafficked her as a minor pleaded guilty and was was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. This was the first case tried by the U.S. District. We have a Attorney General's office, but then we have a U.S. Attorney General. We have a Western District of Missouri that investigates and tries the federal cases, and it was the first case tried by them where buyers were actually prosecuted, which was and is a big deal. This was a minor, a young girl who was in a foster care situation, but ended up moving into the home of a boyfriend, where the father of the boyfriend groomed her and exposed her to pornography, to where she thought that he was her boyfriend and he was 45 years old. They had her believing that she was a sex slave when she turned 18. She did have cognitive disabilities, so they took advantage of that. But there was severe abuse and actually torture of her. She was confined in a cage for several years in the basement of their rural home. They sold her online, they sold her in person, they had her dancing at strip clubs, and the list goes on. So our connection to the coalition is this victim was the first victim, then survivor of trafficking that we had the privilege of serving. And meeting her was a remarkable experience for me, because we had been doing anti-trafficking work for a couple of years, doing education and learning of her case and how horrific it was, and not having any idea about the actual person, but just what happened to her. So meeting her and seeing her as a petite young woman, a human being, a mother. She had a baby that was just several days old when we had the opportunity to help her. It was a reminder and a significant experience to say these individuals are, first, a fellow human being, and second, or even further down the road, what happened to them, that what happened to them doesn't identify who they are. And it was certainly a privilege to serve her. And since then, people like her and many survivors that we have helped following her have really helped inform us, helped us be a better people and a better organization as we've continued to be involved with these individuals and the many stories and the many backgrounds that they have in being exploited and coming back into community and being a part of everyday life. So we appreciate that Laura brought this aspect into her novel, which is a terrific thriller, and welcome her. She is goodness, an award-winning, internationally best-selling author, not only of the novel The Weight of Blood, but also Arrowwood and The Wolf Wants In. The Weight of Blood won the International Thriller Writers Award. I can't pronounce a Silver Falchion Award. Did I say that correctly? For the best first novel. Also, the Missouri Author Award for Fiction. Named the best book of the year by Bookpage, the Kansas City Star, and the Sun-Times in the UK. Her other books have won awards and prizes. She lives in Columbia with her family, and her next novel, What's Done in Darkness, will be coming out June 2021. When I met Laura, her book had not quite come out yet, but was soon to be published. But a brief summary about this novel. The Dane family's roots tangle deep in the Ozark mountain town of Henbane, but that doesn't keep 17-year-old Lucy Dane from being treated like an outsider. Folks still whisper about her mother, who vanished years ago. When Lucy's friend Sherry is found murdered, Lucy feels haunted by the two lost girls, the mother she never knew and the friend she couldn't protect. Determined to find answers, she uncovers a horrific secret worse than anything she could have imagined. The Weight of Blood is an urgent look at the dark side of a bucolic landscape beyond the arm of the law, where a person can easily disappear without a trace. Laura McHugh proves herself a masterly storyteller who has created a harsh and tangled terrain as alive and unforgettable as the characters who inhabit it. Her mesmerizing debut is a compelling exploration of the meaning of family, the sacrifices we make, the secrets we keep, and the lengths to which we will go to protect the ones we love. That should make you want to go and buy the book. And by the way, Skylark Bookshop is donating 10% of the sales of The Weight of Blood back to the coalition, and you can look for their website and order your book. But Laura, with that introduction, we want to show a wave of hand of how many of you have read the book who are on the Zoom call to give Laura an idea of our readers. Show of hand. So Laura, can you see? Okay.
All right, are you ready for me?
Yes, Laura, thank you. You have the floor.
Well, thank you all so much. Thank you, Nanette, for inviting me to be part of this meeting and to get to talk to you all. I'm happy to be here. And yes, I don't know why it took us so long, but I'm glad to be here. So when I started writing this book, I did not set out to write a human trafficking book. I did not have any plan of that whatsoever. I did not know what I was writing at all. Just the micro version of how this began. I had lost my job as a software developer, and I'd always loved writing, always thought about writing a book, and I was suddenly unemployed, and I had a baby and a toddler at home, and decided, you know, I'm gonna try to write this book. What I started writing about was, I didn't have trafficking in mind at all, but I didn't have a plot, I had nothing, but I started with setting. I wanted to write about the Ozarks. And I moved down to the Ozarks when I was in grade school, and I lived in a series of small towns in southern Missouri for most of my childhood, up until I went to college. And so I start writing about this place, which for me, it was always a little bit frightening. Where I lived, it was very remote. You always kind of got the feeling that, you know, if you were in trouble, if something happened to you, like no one would ever know. No one would hear you screaming. No one could ever find you if something was done to you. And that always frightened me a little bit. And I wanted to kind of build that into a story. So when I started writing, I initially had a main character, Lucy, who her mother had vanished when she was a young girl. She had no idea what happened to her. And more recently, her friend has gone missing. It's been missing for about a year, and then her body turns up. So her friend has been recently murdered. So Lucy is wondering what happened to her during this year she was missing. She was somewhere, and then she was killed, and she wants to know what happened. So she really gets drawn into the search for what happened to her mother and what happened to her friend, and will end up coming across a connection between these cases. But when I began, my inspiration for this story was a girl that I went to school with in a small town in southern Missouri. And she was very friendly to everyone. Everyone liked her. She was very nice. She had, you know, cognitive disabilities. She had developmental delays. She wasn't, you know, fully in charge of her faculties and all of that. And in 7th grade, we started to notice she was pregnant. And I mean, it was a very, you know, we always wondered, did she really consent to anything? I mean, she was so young, and, you know, nobody really knew the situation. It was very hard. And then one day she was gone. She was just gone, and we never saw her again. She dropped out of school, or was pulled out of school, and to us, you know, disappeared. At the time, we had no way to find out, you know, what happened to her. Where did she go? Is she okay somewhere? And that really haunted me, you know, for a lot of my life. I would think about her and just think about, you know, where is she? What happened to her? And along with all of this, I would always be following the news stories, crime in the news. And I mean, I grew up in an abusive home myself, and I was always kind of drawn to all these news stories about like abused children and, you know, people who are preyed upon, like these vulnerable populations of people. And so combining all of that, you know, I had this character who was a vulnerable character. and I wasn't really sure what had happened to her, but I knew something bad had happened. And I had seen stories about human trafficking in the news just as part of, me following all these different crimes. And, some of them seemed almost, I don't want to say far-fetched, but you know what I mean? Like, wow, it's hard to believe that's a crazy story. These were things happening in other places, but I hadn't really seen a story like that had happened close to home, someplace that I could relate to, in the Midwest or, a small town. And I was about halfway through writing this novel and still didn't know exactly what had happened to Sherry, except that, it was something bad. She was being exploited in some way during this time. And that was when I came across the article about the trafficking case from Lebanon, Missouri. And there were a couple of reasons that really struck close to home for me. I mean, I had lived in Lebanon. I graduated from high school there. I'd lived there for several years, and it's a small town. It's fairly small. It was smaller back then when I lived there, but everybody knows everyone else's business. Everybody kind of knows what people are up to. And I think it was really more shocking to me that not just that it happened in a small town, but it happened in a place where everybody knows what people are doing. And I was thinking, other people had to have known. It wasn't just one person that was involved in trafficking her. There were the buyers and all these people involved. There was like a web of people here. And I'm thinking, in that town where I was, this was happening, and no one who knew about it was speaking up for this girl or trying to help her. There had to have been people who recognized the situation and did nothing, and either participated or looked the other way. And that was really, really deeply disturbing for me. And the other thing that struck me about it was, I mean, I still know a lot of people from there, and we're friends on Facebook and what have you. And some of us are friends in person still. Not a single person from that town had mentioned this case. And the article I saw was a national article. I believe it was from the FBI. I mean, so people there had to have known about this after the fact, after it was exposed, it was in the news. Surely people knew about it. Not a single person from there had mentioned it. And I thought that was a bit strange as well, which I would learn a little bit more about where that was coming from maybe later on. So when I kind of decided I was going to go in that direction with Sherry's story, and that it would be something along those lines, it was because I had, from that case, I was seeing, it's not outlandish that this could happen in a tiny little town in the Ozarks in the middle of nowhere, where everyone goes to church and everybody knows everybody's business. And the town where the book is set is an even much smaller town than Lebanon. It's a fictional town, but it's based on a little town I lived in down by the Arkansas border. And I thought, I do think it's believable this could happen there. It's a place where people can be hidden away, and, no one would know what had happened to this person if they disappeared. There are lots of places to hide someone. And so I went with that, really influenced, where my story ended up. So what I was doing in the story as I was writing it, once I had come to that conclusion, I was thinking about, the ways that people are vulnerable to trafficking. And Sherry's not the only character who's trafficked in this story. There are other stories and other women who have been brought to this in different ways. And what I really wanted to show, and I had sort of gathered this from all the different cases I had just been reading about all along when I wasn't researching, but just, things I was following anyway and kind of tucking the information away. Just all these different ways that it can happen, but that all of them are vulnerable to it in some way. And so in the story, I wanted to show these believable ways that this could happen. And since I'm not a journalist, I'm not writing nonfiction, I'm not writing a real story, what you're doing in fiction more is like trying to put people in someone else's shoes and trying to have them, live this experience that has never happened to them, but it's happened to someone else, and try to have them see what that is like. And so that's what I was doing, and just trying to show believably how people could get, pulled into this or get exploited, or how it is possible to get into a situation where maybe you trust people and you don't have any idea that you're getting into this, like that this is the end game. You might trust someone, or you might be in trouble and need help, and someone offers you help. I mean, you all know, all the vulnerabilities and that sort of thing. So that's what I was really trying to do. And a goal of mine was I didn't want to sensationalize the crime or the abuse or any of that. I wanted it to be written in sort of a, a realistic way where you're not exploiting these characters' pain and things like that, but just trying to show, what can happen to someone and how terrible this is. And so, once the book came out, and I was lucky it had a good reception, to this book, and the conversation about trafficking, would come up inevitably when I was doing book clubs or book talks and traveling around and that sort of thing. And something that began to surprise me during this was a bit of a backlash from certain groups of people or readers. And I was at one particular book club that I'd been invited to, and a woman yelled at me for like 20 minutes straight. She was furious with me. And the reason was she didn't believe this would happen, where she is from, and that I was making our state look bad by writing a story set here about these terrible crimes, which I will tell you, the crimes that happened to Sherry and the others in The Weight of Blood, they are not as terrible as what happened in the real case in Lebanon. If you go read those details, much more horrible things, with the exception that Sherry is killed in the book and the woman from Lebanon survived. With the exception of that, the real case is much worse. It really is. And so for me, I had a very hard time with this and trying to talk to these people who had that sort of viewpoint of it, and just trying to explain, it's not about you, it's not about me or like pride about where we live. I'm like, these are real things that are happening where we live. And I'm not writing about them to make you look bad or make our area look bad. It happens everywhere, and it can happen everywhere, and it does. And it does in fact happen in Colombia, as we all know now, of course. But at the time, this was, 6-7 years ago, and like maybe there wasn't as much awareness, and people were angry that I was writing about this happening here. So that really was kind of a big surprise to me. And I started thinking, maybe that's part of why the people from Lebanon that I knew were not talking about it. They didn't want people thinking those kind of things happened there, or that they were the kind of people who would let that happen in their view and not notice or do anything. And so by just not talking about it and denying it, to me, that doesn't make it go away, and that doesn't help anything. I think writing about it and exposing it and getting a conversation going and getting that awareness going could be really helpful. One other thing that quite a lot of people were unhappy with and didn't believe was that a woman would be complicit in trafficking other women. And that was something, we've seen it in the Lebanon case. The man was married. His wife was there. And I don't know the case like Nanette knows the case, but I do believe she had perhaps said, it wasn't really her fault. She was scared of her husband, or she didn't want to cross him, or whatever. She was in a vulnerable position as well. And maybe that's why, and I don't know the truth of that, but there's an aspect of that in my story as well. And a lot of people didn't want to believe that any woman would be complicit in that, but there are reasons why women are. Just like men, and maybe they are backed into a corner. They have no choice. Maybe they were abused as well. They're scared of what will happen to them. It's hard to say. So that was another part. But for me, I thought, even if they don't like this or they don't believe this, at least if some of these conversations start to happen because of this book, it could be helpful in a way. Some people who weren't aware of this and the ways that it can happen might become aware. And people might be able to notice some of those warning signs of like vulnerabilities or signs that something isn't right and that this could be happening. If that happens, I think any awareness is a good thing. And so, I can hope that my book did that a little bit, at least in some small way, or for a few people. If it did that, then I can feel good about that. So that's really the story about how I wrote a trafficking book without meaning to. But I'm glad that I did. Yeah, and hopefully some good can come of it.
It really did come out at a time early when there wasn't much awareness. And I think if it came out now, it would have different conversations than you were confronting back then. I'm I imagine there would still be people who might respond because there's still people who aren't aware. Questions for Laura. I do want to say, I should have said, I'm sorry, I should have said that the victim that I talked about in Lebanon, she actually was hurt in such a way that they had to take her to the hospital in the torture that they were doing. And so it was the hospital that reported her, and they were able to rescue her because they took her to the hospital. And I always wonder what kind of crazy story the traffickers told people in the emergency room, because of course they didn't say, well, we were trafficking her and oops, this happened and she needs help now. But thankfully, even without training, it was that horrific that they clearly knew something bad was happening to her. And also your point about Mrs. Bagley, it was Ed Bagley was the husband, but it does say in one of the press releases that Marilyn was the wife's name, that she was treated in a different category than the other defendants who were also charged in this case, that she had experienced 25 years of abuse herself. So as you said, being victimized. She did receive probation for being aware of people coming into the home and being aware of the things that were done to her. But they did cite in the actual press release of her 25 years of abuse herself. So.
I do have a quick question.
Yes, Marlene.
Laura, in what way do you think you would have written differently if you'd been writing an essay or an article of information about this? How did you have to, what was the approach you take as a fiction writer that differs? And do you think one is more effective than another, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both valid, means to tell that kind of story. Obviously, if you're doing an essay or something like that, it has to be factual, and you have to just be, reporting a story as it happened and trying to find out all the real truth about it and that sort of thing. And you can still explain everything about trafficking that way and still develop, empathy for these people that it happens to and that sort of thing with an essay. But from the fiction standpoint, where I'm just making it all up, it's more character driven for me than the story, the facts. It's more about the character journey, like what happens to this character, the emotional journey of that, how they're affected by this sort of thing. So it's just through a slightly different lens. And of course, having the liberty of, it's fiction and I'm making it up. I can shape that situation to whatever way I think it will portray this the most effectively without being kind of stuck by certain facts. So.
Thank you. Was it just coincidence that you and Nanette both knew about this case?
That what? That.
Was it just coincidence that you and Nanette both knew of this case?
Yeah. I didn't know when I had written my book, I didn't know Nanette. I didn't know anything about her. I didn't know until later after I had met her that she was involved, that she had met the woman from Lebanon and that she had been, so I didn't know any of that until after the fact. So yeah, that was very interesting for me to be able to hear that and to know that the woman was okay, that she has a life, beyond this, because all I had seen from, the news article, it's like a list of terrible things that happened to her and court case. And there was nothing really beyond that. I'd really only seen that much. And so it was great to be able to see that there's recovery from this and that there's life after that. And just seeing that the group had been able to help this person that had, I had seen this and connected to it since it was from my hometown. So that was really neat to be able to see.
Thank you.
Other questions for Laura or comments for Laura?
I'll make a comment, Nanette. Can you hear me?
Yes, Christine. Yes, go ahead. Thanks.
we, at one of our coalition meetings in Camdenton, I think CADV had helped this victim,
Yes.
and they had her victim statement that she read out in court. And the horrific things
Oh.
that her trafficker did to her, I applaud her that she's able to go on, because there was not a dry eye in our audience. You just can't imagine the things that happen to these people, and it just makes you so sad that people are so mean and horrific to other people. It just boggles my mind. But if somebody gets a chance to read her statement, they should.
And CADV is the domestic violence shelter in Camdenton.
Yes, yes.
Just so other people who might not know the acronym. I think there's one of our, oh, Loretta, sorry.
So Laura, I was curious if there's any like local superstitions or anything like that that kind of found its way into the book.
Yeah, I found it so interesting when I moved to the Ozarks and just meeting a lot of the people that we met there were much older folks, and they had all kinds of interesting little superstitions that were just, it was fascinating to me. And I really was absorbing all of these as a kid, not knowing I would ever do anything with them, and then just kind of sticking them in this book. But of course, it's exaggerated a bit in the book. Like, nobody, when I lived there, ever thought like anyone was really a witch or anything like that kind of thing. But just little things, just so many little fun things, like cutting open the persimmon seed to see the inside and see what the winter's going to be. Lots of little things like that. And it was really fun for me, because to us, like, we've been in Southern Missouri, a lot of little things like that are just, you're just used to that. It's just a normal thing. But it was fun for like my editors and everything in New York, and they're reading all this stuff and they're like, what the heck is that? Like, that's really weird. Like, I've never heard of any of that. And just little things like getting the sassafras roots out of the ground and boiling, or like how you fix greens, how you have to boil them so much so they're not poisonous. And they're just like, what kind of place is this? You know, they thought the Ozarks was some other planet. So it was really fun for me to work a lot of things in there that were just normal things that other people don't see that way.
I did find the nature writing about the Ozarks was just beautiful. I still remember that persimmon bit. And I think something about frogs or turtles. I mean, just reading about the place so beautifully written helped me empathize with the characters, I believe. It put me in that world. I was ready to hear whatever you had to say.
Oh, thank you. That is a wonderful compliment. I really appreciate that. I worked hard on that.
You succeeded.
Thank you.
And we should say that Marlene is an author herself.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so.
And I know Marlene, so we've known each other for a while.
Each other.
Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you all for
Yeah.
listening about the book, and it's just been really nice to be able to connect with you all. And I always love getting the chance to see Nanette and catch up on all the great things you all are doing and the things that she's doing. So it was a real privilege for me to be able to speak with you all.
Thank you. So I also want to say, and Laura, your comments about that Laura's book was used as required reading for a law class at MU. And so we had the opportunity to come and speak to that class from her having written this book, and also my work directly with survivors. But Laura, what would be your takeaway from the students at MU who are in law school reading this as required reading?
I thought it was so neat. I loved how you and I got to go and kind of talk together about these things. And to me, it was just seeing these students, these upcoming law students, and them thinking about going out into the world and these careers that they were going to do, and just how much they were learning about all these things of domestic violence and trafficking and all of that, and how they were already thinking about that stuff and how they were going to be dealing with that in the real world and through, you know, writing bills or doing whatever aspect of the law they were going to be involved in. It was really neat to be able to see that and to see these young people coming up, learning all of that and ready to apply it. So that was really cool.
I'm guessing you probably didn't imagine your book would have that kind of impact and be used in that kind of a powerful way.
When I wrote my book, I didn't know anyone would ever read it. I didn't think it would get published, it would ever see the light of day.
Yeah.
So that was really great. And there's some other colleges that read the book in their classes, and I'm always amazed to hear that. And it's like I'll always cling to that. Like if I never accomplish anything else in my life, you know, at least I can remember that. So.
Well, what are some of the other classes that are reading your book? Like this, the one that the law class, they were like family violence, I think specifically was their focus. So what were these other classes?
Oh, the other ones I would say by and large are like mystery or just like literature, mystery literature, or fiction, that sort of thing. Or like Ozark, if it's especially, you know, Ozark literature, it's involved in that kind of thing too.
Yeah. There was one student, when you mentioned how they had these visions and what they did, there was one student who was working to create some legislation to require human trafficking education as part of the Missouri driver's exam. And I think she's still working on that, by the way, folks. So we may someday hear about that being a part of the driver's license exam, making sure that people have to learn and be tested on that. I think that's what it was, through the Missouri driver's exam.
Yeah, and I thought that was very smart. That's a smart way to get so many people coming through just to get that education.
So how old are your children, Laura?
They are 11 and 14.
So have you had, as a mom, knowing what you know about trafficking, conversations with them as a parent? I know that's a personal question, but just...
Well, yeah, not so much with my younger one, but the older one a little bit. And obviously they haven't read my books yet. They really have no interest in reading them, honestly. So we haven't had that conversation yet about whether or not they're ready to read it. But yeah, I think maybe I've gone overboard at times in making them suspicious or scared of things. And I think that's such a delicate line. I don't want them to live in fear and suspicion of people, but I'm always trying to point out things that this doesn't seem quite right, or you want to avoid this kind of situation or person or something like that. And so it's just kind of a balance, trying not to scare them too much, because I want to put these certain kinds of knowledge and fear into them a little bit, so they're wary, but not terrified. I don't know, it's hard as a parent.
Yeah, yeah. And Pete, I'm remembering when I came and presented to your employees, we had kind of an aha moment when I was talking about, was it this case? I've been racking my brains, and I have to just ask you, because I think it was this case.
It was.
That I was sharing in general terms with his employees. Do you want to tell the rest of the story, Pete?
I'll let you, but it was one of those moments where you go, wow, you just never know.
Yeah, so Laura, you know, with this, the impact of this particular case, and as you said, anybody who goes out there and read the press releases, it should have, you know, a warning above it, because even the Federal Department of Justice press releases are very graphic and very detailed. But there'll be no question in your mind about the things that were done and all the different defendants and buyers and all the ways she was exploited. And that's what was so remarkable, is, you know, going to a motel room. They had to temporarily stay. She and the baby had to stay temporarily in a motel room, and opening the door, and she's this very petite person, shorter than I am, which I'm 5 feet, and had very long hair, and she was holding a little teeny baby. And, you know, just that contradiction between what I had read about her and seeing this very grateful and happy to have company person. So, but I was sharing in general terms about this case, and I was standing at the one end of a very long conference table around which the employees were. At the opposite end of me was one of the employees, and I could just see this look kind of coming over her. And I paused, and I don't know exactly. I'm telling the story as kind of my brain remembers, but she said that was her stepsister. Is that correct? It was her stepsister that I was talking about. And it was like, oh, I mean, it was a huge, oh my gosh moment for everyone. It was like, made it so real and so close to home to have a stepsister sitting in that room saying, that was my stepsister. And she remembered her stepsister, like not being in her parents having to go to the hospital. And, she was young enough that she remembered the commotion around it, but she didn't know exactly what happened. And so just her recognizing enough of what I said, then also thinking, oh my gosh, Nanette, what did I just say? Was pretty heart stopping for everybody. And well, that's no more needs to be said. How much more real can this be for all of you sitting around the table in, banking industry, in service kind of thing. And I know that I don't know, Pete, maybe you can say, I know we went after the session when she went back to her office, and I wanted to, the good thing is that she was, this individual was doing fine, as Christine, as you know, that she received some services in the area, and I have heard that she's doing fine. We actually gotten a call from the feds after her case was over, asking if she were to move in this area, would we be able to provide some support, which of course we said yes. So they were searching around for where in Missouri to relocate her, and she ended up in a different area. But I know that, it was a pretty emotional time for this family member. And so we didn't actually connect again after, but we went back to the office area to at least check and make ourselves available. So Pete, what was the after?
It was one of those things that, because of her age and the difference in age, she knew something had happened. But, like Laura said, nobody talked about it. Nobody said anything about it. And it was kind of quiet. And she never spent the time to really look at it more. And I think she kind of had it in the back of her brain that something really bad happened. But as she was going through the conversation, it all of a sudden was going, holy cow, that is exactly what I've known. And it was, she continued to work for us for quite a while longer. She graduated college and went into her chosen career field at this point, but it really did, and it really still doesn't have an impact on our team that says it hits really close to home. And what we're doing may not mean, a lot of time it's boring paperwork. It's bang, I'm staring at numbers, I'm flipping paperwork, but it does make a difference. And it was a good poignant story to say, this is what happens. And we still see that all the time, where it's something we saw that eventually becomes a court case, and it does have value. But at the time, it was one of those things that was like, and I could see, and that you're like, oh gosh, what did I just do? And it was completely, nobody had any idea of the relationship until it started going, and it clicked in her brain. So it really was it's a good story, and we still use that as we talk about it.
Yeah. So yeah, another circle where her story had an impact. And then, Laura, just seeing the connection with all of us here is pretty remarkable. And the distance that it's gone and having an impact, thankfully, because can't take away the horror of what happened, but how far the impact has been made in many audiences, in many circles, really I mean, Laura, has your book been translated into other languages yet?
It has
Oh my
oddly,
gosh.
oddly a lot of languages like Russian and Turkish and Italian and Dutch and I can't remember all of them exactly, but there
Oh
were
my gosh.
quite a few and is in the
That's
UK.
giving me goosebumps to think, not, it's like on the one hand, the intensity of the closeness and how these cases tie so closely together to us individually and personally within our own communities, but then getting goosebumps thinking about the translation and, again, that how far and wide the impact is really remarkable. I don't know if she'll ever get to know that. Maybe someday she can. I don't know, but at least I'm glad to know that she's doing okay.
Nanette,
Yeah.
excuse me, does
Any-
Laura know,
Yes.
does Laura know that Pete's job is tracking money laundering and illegal activities through banking procedures?
Oh, no, I didn't know that.
That makes
She
it.
does now.
Now I need to talk to you for
Yeah.
a good idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have no idea.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Pete. I hope it's okay I said that.
Well, actually, it's. I'm glad you did that, Marlene. Yeah, we introductions, but yeah, so Pete and the whole money issue, but then it was hit home so personally in that context for them. So go ahead, Pete.
No, that's what I do. I chase money. I see bad guys, and yeah, I always tell people if I ever be evil, I know so many ways to do so many bad things and get away with it. It's a horrible thing, but that's partially where I'm and part of this group is knowing the stuff that happens and trying to be able to do a little bit to help in a little tiny way is good because we see some bad things.
Yeah. So Laura, he can be your consult if in your next novel you have to, have some money laundering stuff in your next thriller. Yeah. Real quick, now that I guess I want to just check in. Ed, I wondered if there were to just again talking about the awareness and the impact we all have, and Ed and we did the presentation there in Mexico. You ended up talking to some people after that and trying to expand the awareness. You want to touch on that at all?
Yes, after the presentation, I was asked when the next one was going to be. Obviously, we don't have a date yet, but I do want to expand the awareness training to our law enforcement and medical personnel and fire department, as Dan had mentioned before. I think that if there's more awareness and we give them something to look for, we can put a damper on a lot of cases. There are several cases that come through Mexico that go unreported to police, and that just doesn't make sense to me. But like I said, it may be a lack of training, lack of awareness. But if we can get that training to our people, to the people that need it, then maybe we can kind of hone in on some of the trafficking. I'm thinking that, if my cousin was trafficked here in Mexico, and so if, we had people that knew what to look for, maybe she could have been saved. Maybe she would still be alive today. But we don't have that training here, and I'm hoping that we can kind of broaden our training and awareness and get people on board to be able to identify some things.
And if you don't mind, I think we have enough new people, and I think Laura's, with her being touched by the example of what happened in Lebanon, and you being affected because of that personal connection. Would you mind sharing briefly your reference to your cousin?
Yeah, she was my cousin, and she lived in Mexico, an aspiring attorney. She was trafficked by, I'm assuming they had to be friends of hers. I'm not sure how, what the connection was, but I knew the guys and female that were involved in her trafficking. There were 3 males and 1 female. The female was in charge of getting the dates, or if you will, and then the 3 guys were doing the trafficking along with the other folks that come in. Everyone's in jail right now. I found through my works in law enforcement, I found 5 houses and 2 businesses here in Mexico that dabble in trafficking, and one in Fulton that's associated with the businesses here in Mexico. I have names and addresses, so hopefully we can put a damper on that and make people more aware. But that's the thing, that people just don't know about it.
Yeah.
You know,
And it was through some notes she left behind that you were able to know
yes,
this.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Before she committed suicide, she did leave notes for her brothers detailing what had happened to her, and the house that she was kept in, which is actually right across the street from where she committed suicide. And I know the property, I know the house, and it's just a hard pill to swallow. Knowing that she was so close and a personal relative of mine. And I found out about it on my way to work one morning. I had gotten a phone call, and they were asking me if I was going to go to the museum, because there was they had found a body up there, and I had not heard about it. It was 7:30 in the morning. I had not heard about it, so I drove by there, and there were lots of law enforcement already there. So I went on to work, and got a phone call later that it was my cousin. So I'm friends with the funeral director, so I called him and asked if I could go view the body, and he let me go in there. And it was my cousin. I saw her there, and it was, I didn't have words. It was kind of hard to take. So I just left there and just went home and told some family, and so we can kind of get things going on in that end. And going to the funeral was hard as well, knowing that her tormentors are still out there at the time, and I was just felt like I had to go get them. I wanted them to pay for what they did, and make an example out of somebody, and like I said, I found them, and I still have their information to this day, but they're incarcerated now, and which is satisfying to me
Yeah.
and to her immediate family. So
Yeah. Thank you for sharing it, Ed. I know that it's just another example of how close to home, and how, I mean, so many things that are important about that, how it's happening right in front of us without our being aware.
right.
And I think Mexico's even smaller town than Lebanon, Missouri, much smaller town.
And the size of Mexico, people don't believe that it actually can happen here in Mexico. It happens, because this time last year there were reports of, I think there were about 6 males that would go from Mosher's department or grocery store to Walmart. They would follow women around the store, and it got to the point where the associates were notified, but again, they didn't know what to look for. They didn't have the training, so that nothing happened at that. So one lady did call her husband, and he met her at Walmart, and he walked her to her car while these guys followed them out to the parking lot and watched them leave. But it happens. It's happening here. It's happening pretty much all over. And if of course, I understand, going to some of the presentations and the readings that I've been, doing. I understand why the victims don't say if asked, or they can, they tell us, make up a story. I understand that now, but I wish there was a way we can get through and talk to and make, have them actually feel comfortable enough to tell us what's really going on. So from the point where they're in the hospital, they can go into, safety and get help and go from there.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's a work in progress. So
Yes, a lot of work to do still. Yeah. Yeah.
May I just want to say one thing. When I hear Pete and Ed talk about their actual work, and they have reasons to be cynical, but they don't let the cynicism keep them from trying to help and make things better. I really admire that.
right.
Thank you.
It's a goal of mine to get, some training to our hospitals and our law enforcement and fire departments. Like I said, even with my own organization, Anointed Life Saving Ministries, we deal a lot with kids. So it's important to me to let my board members here, as well as our tutors, become aware of trafficking and social media and all that comes with it, so they can have a know what to look for, and be able to save somebody if they need to be saved.
Thanks. Really do appreciate you sharing, Ed. And I think there's a survivor. I had heard at one time that there were people, and there's some conspiracy theories, and it's hard to sort out those from actual things that happen, because we do know that traffickers use all types of strategies. There was one story about traffickers recruiting people to inviting them to Bible study. And there's a gentleman, victim of trafficking, who recently has reached out and has many, many stories about what he's learned because of being victimized that his traffickers do. And one of them is to do that they recruit people by inviting them to a Bible study, but they also target people who are drug addicted, or drug users, and get them addicted. And then they, sort of mess with the drugs without people realizing, the victims realizing that little changes are being made. And also because of the addiction, they're required in their, basically their slavery to commit criminal acts for the traffickers. And so that criminal background, then criminal history, really complicates those things for our victims. So there's so many different layers and complications, whether it's drug addiction or disability, or just being young and vulnerable and pretty, So anything else from our
Well,
folks?
it's funny that you mentioned the cult or the Bible study thing, because
Yeah.
when I was going to school in Atlanta, I was approached by a guy who invited me to Bible study, and from that he invited me to church, and it just didn't sit right with me. Something was not right, because I've been in church since I was in my single digits from a kid on up, so I had that foundation. It turns out that it was a cult that he was trying to get me into, and when I chose to leave and not return, he followed me. He chased me. He would show up at my dormitory. He would, call me 8, 9 times a day. Wanted me to come back. One day I got out of class and was in my dorm. Thought I would take a nap on the couch before I start doing homework. And just as I was about to fall into a deep sleep, something told me to open my eyes.
Oops. There you go.
Got in there, but
I didn't hear that.
he was in my dormitory, and things didn't turn out well, because obviously I felt violated, but he got the point, and I never heard from him again. He was out to get me to join this cult. I won't say organization, but it was a cult. And I was talking to my mother about it, and she was worried about me and told me to get away and not return, but which I hadn't. And it was a good thing that I did, because I didn't know what their motives were, and they were asking me to do all these asinine things that I just didn't agree with, so I left it, never returned. But it kind of worked, it kind of makes me think what could have happened if I had not woken up.
Yeah. Everything could have been completely different.
Yeah.
Could have had a different ending to that story, for sure.
But I'm sorry, I didn't hear that, but something happened to I didn't hear what he did in the room. Did he attack you?
No, he was just watching me laying on the couch sleeping. I'm sure he
Okay.
probably would have done something had I not woken up.
Okay.
I don't know what his intentions were, but he was just, at the point, he was just standing there over me, watching me.
Okay. Thank you.
Nanette,
Yes.
this is Laura Cooley.
Yeah.
I was wondering if these young women that are sex trafficked, Is there abortion involved in some of this stuff, in some of this trafficking? Okay.
Yeah, actually, you bring up a point that I had not thought of myself until one particular presentation that I heard, or actually it was a documentary. And in that documentary, there was someone who represented an abortion clinic and speaking to that fact. Like we talk about emergency room people paying attention, and, you know, highway patrol noticing when they pull people over. And she was bringing up that point of people being brought into abortion clinics who are being brought in by their traffickers. And I'd never thought of that before, but yes, yeah.
I've been editing a book on that. That's why I came up with it, because I'm working on that book as an editor, not the writer.
I listened to a survivor of trafficking talk about how she had had multiple abortions throughout her time whenever she was being trafficked. And one of the things that she commented on is whenever she would come out of those clinics, you know, if only there had been somebody there to help me instead of people being outside shaming.
Yes.
That, you know, she just, a part of her just always thought if somebody had been there to really just say, can I help you? Do you need something? You know, would you like some food or just anything, how that might have changed the course of, you know, what her next step would have been. So,
Yeah.
I'll talk to you more about it, Nanette.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Laura, I appreciate you as an amazing author, and also what's the word? You hadn't planned on being an advocate for human trafficking, but you became one very quickly once your book came out and people started asking you questions. But we appreciate that as well. So again, you have any last words for us, Laura?
No, just thank you. And I appreciate all the great work that you all are doing. And I like following that and seeing what all you're doing. You know, catch a little bit of that on social media and such. And just, it's amazing how you're helping survivors. So thank you for doing that.
Sorry, I just went, sorry, this story about abortion clinics, there was an example of when we had a call from, it was an adoption agency, and they were concerned about a woman who'd been brought from out of state to give birth to her baby to be given up for adoption. And they were concerned about how there was a male in the room, never leaving, never letting her speak for herself. And there was suspicion that she was a victim of trafficking who'd been brought from out of state to give birth and give up the baby, and then to be left again. And this was years ago. And so I don't want to mention the agencies because I think they have much more awareness now. But one of the employees wanted to advocate for somebody interfering in some way, but the powers that be within our agency said that's not within our purview. And so, unfortunately, there was no opportunity for interference in that case. They didn't feel like they could find a way to talk to her by herself. But of course, I'm sure there are many ways that we could have thought up to do that. So just feeling like that was, you know, one lost, you know, taken back out of state with their trafficker. But yes, in many, many places that we need to realize where victims might come into our space and being able to be sensitive and aware. So anyway, another story. But Laura, I appreciate you so much that you spent time with us, helped stir our thinking and our brain juices, and hopefully everyone. Very large bookstore. I'm just going to be shameless because, hey, I got the author on the Zoom call here with me, right? 10% of the sales going to the coalition.
And it's signed.
The Realer book. Thumbs up Thumbs up. Okay, 2 thumbs up. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good night. And I know there's so many stories about each of you here on the Zoom call of what you're doing. So thank you for that. You all know who you are and what you are doing. And January will be, you know, pandemic or no pandemic, the work will go on. I know you'll continue to be engaged with us. We'll continue to bring new people on board to do this work. We'll continue to be educated with great speakers such as Laura and bring them into our circle, and keep our heads, our wits about us, and paying attention, being aware, doing what we can to share the awareness in any way that you can. So thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Merry Christmas.